I'm Bob Brill. He's Eric Kramer. Welcome to Kramer and Brill, a fantasy football podcast and a video cast as well. Hear the podcast wherever you get the podcast. Also, you can hear the video cast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. That's the easiest way, www.kramerandbrill.com. Hey, we're into week 9 now, the bye week. It's the Lions, the Seahawks, the Buccaneers, and the Washington Football Club. So if you have any of those guys on those teams, you got to find somebody to replace them this week. Key injuries and trades this week: Derrick Henry out for the season. Calvin Ridley, who we'll talk about in a minute. Steelers kicker Boswell. Robert Tonyan, Mark Ingram to the Saints. Von Miller to the Rams. Adrian Peterson signs to the Titans. Jameis Winston, torn ACL. T.Y. Hilton, concussion. Sam Darnold, a concussion. All this is going to affect your week. Meanwhile, the winners this week: Mike White, backing up for the Jets, throws for 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, despite the 2 picks in a win over the Bengals. Justin Fields, 175 passing, 103 yards rushing, including 2 TDs. Matt Stafford, 305, 3 TDs against his old team. And Geno Smith with a big win. Eric, you got to look at this. This is interesting.
I love it. Well, hey, first of all, shame on me for not knowing this Mike White. He didn't just have a good game; he had a great game. Over 400 yards, you mentioned, 3 touchdowns against one of the hottest teams in the Bengals, and got the win. And then I was there live to see Fields in action, and it's not even close by far. He's the best quarterback the Bears have ever had. And I'll say 2 running backs that I'll point out this past weekend. First, your guy, Najee Harris, 91 yards on the ground and a touchdown, added about almost 29 yards in the air. And then the other one guy is the Patriots' Damian Harris. Didn't crack 100 yards, but still had 80 yards and a touchdown. And probably the best catch of the weekend and definitely the year is Rasul Douglas, the cornerback for the Packers, who ended the Cardinals game with a one-handed interception to end it. And unbelievable. And earlier in the year, obviously, he was cut by the Cardinals. So kind of a cool turnaround story there.
Well, among the running backs this week, Michael Carter had 77 rushing, also had 9 catches. Elijah Mitchell, now this is 3 straight 100-yard games for him. The Niners, that hasn't happened in Niner land in forever.
Well, and the Charger guy that I love, the all-purpose running back, Austin Eckler, put up over 120 scrimmage yards, got in the end zone again. And then this Philly's actual running backs took over this week. And Boston Scott, Jordan Howard, both combined for 4 touchdowns on the ground. And Scott added 60 yards rushing, where Howard only 57. But still, a good combination out of both those guys.
Well, the wide receivers, we had A.J. Brown and Michael Pittman. Pittman had a monster day, 10 catches, 2 touchdowns. Brown had 10 catches, 155 yards, didn't have the touches. But, also a good touch for Godwin, Cooper, Lockett, Deebo Samuel, Kupp, all over 100 yards, also with Cole Beasley.
Now, I know you didn't forget him, but somehow you left off the Steelers' Deontay Johnson.
Yeah.
Maybe that was just to see if I was paying attention.
There you go.
He almost had 100 yards, about 98, I think, on 6 catches, 1 for 50 yards. And then the other guy, even though they lost, was the Bengals' T. Higgins, who got back on track with 4 catches for 97 yards, no touchdown. But Tyler Boyd got in the end zone and had another 69 yards on his 5 catches. Now, you mentioned the big day put up by Tyler Lockett for Seattle, but it was Metcalf that actually got in the end zone twice. And maybe the biggest impact of any receiver this past week was Tyreek Hill against the Giants last night. 12 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. Could have been a lot more. Mahomes underthrew him on a couple passes that would have been huge. And, I think he really affects the way a defensive coordinator and the safeties play, and not close to the line of scrimmage. They're 18, 20 yards off to start the play, and which is going to open up, hopefully, a running lane like it did last night.
You almost have to triple team him.
Yeah, there's no point in single coverage because when he gets the ball in his hands, he's gone. There's nobody that can keep up with him.
He's just so doggone quick. Not only the speed, but it's the quickness. Hey, the losers this week: Terry McLaurin and Cortland Sutton had 5 catches between them for a total of 60 yards. Leonard Fournette, who we expected better of, 8 for 26 yards, 8 carries, 26 yards. Matt Ryan really 2 picks, 146 yards. It's just bad week for them. We like Garoppolo. We liked Fields. We liked Stafford. All were solid. We liked Herbert. It was okay. Didn't get touchdown worthy, but Elijah Mitchell, Mixon, and Harris, Pittman, Deebo Samuel, Metcalf, all along with Freiermuth and Goddard, they were all solid. We liked all those guys this week.
Well, and I'll say looking ahead, I'll go with Mr. Predictable quarterback Josh Allen. Went for over 300 yards scrimmage-wise, a couple of touchdowns passing, one rushing. And then the big receiver for him this week wasn't Diggs. It was Cole Beasley, who, as you mentioned, went over 100 yards. And it just seems like Brady's going to put up numbers every week, doesn't it? I mean, he threw a couple of interceptions that were keyed for the loss, but still, the receiving end of him this week was Chris Godwin, who went, 140 yards and a touchdown on his 8 catches. And you mentioned Geno Smith earlier. So if you're looking ahead at the schedule that the Seahawks play, here's the teams they have coming up. Here's 4 of them: Washington, San Francisco, Houston, and Detroit. All not very good defenses. So fantasy owners, you might want to pay attention to pick him up as a possible replacement if your quarterback has a bye week.
And Russell Wilson's coming back in a couple weeks, so you can get that. And Geno Smith is going to play very well because he wants to keep that. I mean, mentally, I think he's really good right now. On top of that, because he knows that this is time to shine. Because when Russell Wilson comes back, it's going to be Russell Wilson's team again. See, I want to take a sidestep here to talk about an important issue. First of all, this last week we saw Atlanta's top wide receiver Calvin Ridley say he's stepping away from football in the middle of the season to deal with some mental health issues. First, it was gymnast Simone Biles, then tennis number 1 Naomi Osaka, and now Ridley. These are all top athletes performing at the top of their game. Now, you've dealt with some mental health issues in the past, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on this latest move by Ridley.
Well, I think it's great, the fact that the NFL has kind of jumped out in front of this, and over the past year has really made it a priority in the way that every team now has some behavioral clinician fully staffed that is there to deal specifically with some of these mental health issues. And I think it's great for someone like Calvin Ridley and the others you mentioned that during the season, this is an acceptable and even not just acceptable, but sort of ushered in by the NFL. And so I think, as you mentioned, in my life, I've had several issues crop up from time to time, one of which, mental health related, happened to me back in 1994, the first one, when I was playing for the Bears. And this wasn't the climate back then. And so I did the best I could really to hide it and showed up every day, even though I didn't want to get out of bed ever. And just, over time, what I encountered was eventually this is what it took to turn the tide. It took me to reach out to a mental health professional, a therapist, and eventually get on some antidepressants. And the combination of the two was not an overnight fix, unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, just the reality of it is it's not. And it takes maybe a month, maybe 2, to start to turn the dark cloud perspective into something a little more optimistic. And I just, as you mentioned, Calvin Ridley, there's been Dak Prescott and Lane Johnson recently, the tackle with the Eagles. In the season, it's really a breath of fresh air for me to know that the NFL has taken this long-range view that, let's get these guys back on track, however long it takes, and then welcome them back when they get back good and healthy and ready to go.
Is part of it, I imagine some of it's just pressure of being a professional athlete and playing at that level. But is part of it the pressure from the fans as well as colleagues and just the things that you're facing in your daily life?
Well, I think in my case, I can only speak for me, but at times when anxiety followed by isolation, or maybe the two go hand in hand, and depression, when all that sets in, it's the biggest misperception you could possibly have. because you really aren't alone, and you just think you are. And so I think it takes, some support around you, and it takes you reaching out though also, and like Calvin Ridley and others are doing, and said, hey, time out, I need a break here, and here's why I need a break. And then hopefully those resources are available to you, and you're actually steered in that direction. And I think that's a good way to go about it, because the misperception is I'm letting everybody down, or I'm letting myself down, or my team, or in the pro athlete's case, this especially the one who's on a team, the city, the fans, everybody. Well, that's not really the case. It just feels like that. And so talking it out and getting out from underneath that cloud, stepping away like Calvin Ridley is doing. And I don't know what his particular mental health issues are, but I think just stepping away, obviously he thinks he needs it, and the team is supporting him in that.
It's interesting because 30, 35 years ago, if we were talking about this type of issue, we were just talking about physical injury, because in the 60s and 70s, a player, if he got hurt, or if he came out, got banged up, maybe had a concussion, and the idea was the trainer was sending him back in. Come on, just get back in there. And now we've progressed to the point where we've kind of passed that in some ways, but now we're on to the mental health issues, which, like you said, I agree with you. It's a breath of fresh air to see the NFL taking this to heart and dealing with people, because you may be a top athlete, you may be making millions of dollars that everybody looks up to, and you may have a lot, but you're still just a regular person. You're just you're a person, and that's who you are. You have to deal with all that stuff.
We're all tied into the human condition, aren't we?
You got it.
And one last thing I'd like to say about this is that, I'm actually behind the scenes working on hopefully bringing a program to whether it's schools or after school programs, starting earlier with kids, 4th, 5th grade on up through high school, and starting to. The idea I have, and this is based on some experiences that I've had over the years, of getting kids to be able to certainly identify, or start to identify, traits, good characteristic traits in themselves and in others, and so that eventually you can start building and learn how to build your own sort of support system, or home team, if you call it. And that way, let's just take 4th, 5th grade, 6th graders, bullying on school campuses, or cyberbullying, that immediately has a way of leading itself to isolation for the person who's being bullied. Whereas if you had a group of people that from time to time you go to just out of habit, and then express yourselves in these kinds of ways, as you grow up and become into your later teens and 20s and 30s and 40s, then this is kind of who you are, is dealing with challenges by way of reaching out to other people. So I think that can lend itself to possibly proactively intervene instead of letting isolation and anxiety and depression take hold. You kind of proactively counteract that.
Cool. Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a real good plan. Well, I'll tell you what, let's move on with football and fantasy football. And we're going to do something a little different this time. And I'll tell you why. We're going to start with the Monday night game instead of Thursday. Why? Because it's your Bears against my Steelers. Look at it. My Steelers against your Bears. It looks like my fantasy team will not be playing Khalil Herbert this week. That's for sure. The Bears are rebounded. So did the Steelers. So am I on Ben this week? Historically, he's great against the Browns, who they beat 15-10 last week. Against the Bears, last week, Ben had 0 points at halftime in fantasy. 0. He ended up with 14 in ESPN standard leagues, about 20 in other leagues. I got to say, I'm probably sitting him this week. I'm starting Najee. I'm starting Freiermuth, who I love. I'm starting Deontay Johnson, of course. But the other issue is who's going to kick for Pittsburgh. Boswell went into the protocol, so keep an eye on that for this week. They did sign Josh Lambo. They signed him with the practice squad. So he's their backup this week. Of course, he's kicked for the Chargers. He's a veteran. So if Boswell's your guy this week, you may want to put him on your IR. And then if you have an IR in your league, and then pick up Lambeau or, find another kicker. But that's the situation at this point.
Let me point a couple things out here regarding these two teams you just brought up. So there's one of them that's on a roll and one of them that's clearly not. And the one that is the Steelers. And when you're thinking about, I know if there's still time left for you to set your lineup, I wouldn't jump off Ben's bandwagon just yet, because the Bears defense made the 49ers offense, Jimmy Garoppolo, Deebo Samuel, look amazing. I mean, so consider that for a second. If I jump over to the Bears, as we've been saying all along, with all these buys coming along, and if you've got, let's take this week, for example, you got Wilson, you got Brady on a buy, but somewhere along the way you picked up Justin Fields, this would be a great week to start him, because he looked phenomenal himself last week against the 49ers, both running and passing. And so even though he's a rookie, like Mac Jones, there's some things about him that are getting better. In fact, a lot of things. He's got a great package to start with, and he's getting better. So Khalil Herbert, I'm talking about, is also an option there. Running back, had another strong game, and then Darnell Mooney as well at receiver.
So we got Thursday night. Now we passed on to Monday. Let's go back to the regular format. Jets at Colts. This could be an interesting game, with the big question being which Carson Wentz is going to show up and where is he going to screw up. I'm never a starter with this guy anymore. I used to love him, but I can't do it. I do love Pittman. I do love Taylor, especially with T.Y. Hilton out again. A good pickup could be Zach Pascal, who should get some targets at wideout.
Yeah. What was that left-handed desperation heave Carson Wentz threw that turned into an interception down the goal line area?
Was that just – it was like watching the Keystone Cops, or something along that line, And I know I date myself with that one, but I haven't dated myself in a long time. So it was, it's just really, I looked at that and I said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Go down, just sit, do something, but don't do that. That was a pickup game on a Sunday afternoon play, when you're out playing with, 6-on-6 and touch football, geez. Anyway,
right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to unleash the hounds right there, but your point's well taken. I'd say depending on who I have on my fantasy starter, I'm probably not playing Mike White, even though he made a great statement last week. He was drafted in 2018. Last week was his only NFL game experience. So following up last week's miracle performance with another one, I don't see that coming.
Yeah, that's
but I consider picking up and starting Michael Carter, the running back, because he can give you both rushing and receiving yards as well as touchdowns. Probably no other Jet, though, that I'd consider starting here.
Going to Sunday, we got the Falcons and Saints. No Jameis Winston, no Taysom Hill. So it's Trevor Siemian, the former Bronco, and suddenly the Saints are looking like a playoff team, maybe. Not sold on Siemian at the moment, except they are playing the terrible Falcons. Keeping an eye on the injury wire for Hill. It may be a last-minute thing, but if he's playing, I'm playing Taysom Hill. Maybe he gets one start a year, but if he's going to play, I'd play him. Kamara and Ingram are starter and flex. I'd watch the injury wires on Michael Thomas. If he's playing, I'd play him. If not, a good pickup might be Traquan Smith or even Deontay Harris.
Just as the NFL world was starting to believe in the Falcons, up pops last week's performance against Carolina. So no Pitts for me, no Ryan. The only Falcon I consider starting is the guy you mentioned earlier in the year, is Cordarrelle Patterson, who last week combined for 70 scrimmage yards, but he caught a touchdown as well.
Broncos Cowboys, if Dak has to sit another week, his backup is Cooper Rush, looks good enough. And if he does, Cedric Wilson is a good pickup. They seem to have some chemistry there. Of course, they're the number two guys, so they practice more than with the number one. Dalton Schultz was a bust this week, so I'd lay off him unless Dak is back. If Dak is back, then I like Dalton Schultz. If not, I don't.
Well, I'll say this: the Cowboys D is now one of the best in the NFL. And earlier in the year, I was high on Teddy Bridgewater, the Broncos quarterback, but he's fallen on some hard times and completed a high percentage of his passes this past week. And no cause mistakes, but still, really not a lot of yards, and I think he got in the end zone, throwing the ball one time. But that to me, fantasy owners at a quarterback spot, they need some points, and I don't think we're getting them there right now out of Bridgewater. And then you mentioned Cortland Sutton had a bad week. I thought he was going to actually have a good week and didn't. And so for me, at this point, there's really no Bronco I'd invest in either.
Patriots and Panthers, I'm sold on Mac Jones. I'm solid there, as well as Harris, but I don't like anybody else on this team.
And the one and only Panther I'd even consider starting is running back Chuba Hubbard. He's had a few solid games this year. Last week, he went for 82 rushing yards and a touchdown. But that's only if I had running backs like Fournette and maybe Antonio Gibson this week on a bye.
Vikings at Ravens. I hate the Ravens, so I'm going to take the Vikings. You're not going to get me to take the Ravens ever. Kirk Cousins, somewhat off last week, so I like him to rise to the competition. I also like the same for Dalvin Cook. Conklin is not a bad slot for a bye week tight end.
And coming off the bye and the previous week thumping by the Bengals, I look for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens to rebound this week. He's still putting up impressive numbers because, remember, he gets some running and passing. But last week, so did Mike White of the Jets go off. And so I would say this. While there's no Ravens running backs I'd start, I would start Hollywood Brown if I had him. Possibly receiver Rashad Bateman and definitely tight end Mark Andrews.
Browns at Bengals. Chubb was back, but he and Ernest Johnson could do nothing against the Steeler defense. Mayfield's still playing hurt. It's not his throwing arm and shoulder, but he is playing hurt. I don't like any brownies this week against the Bengals, especially since the Bengals lost last week. I think there's a vengeance to come back. The only guys I might play are Landry and Njoku, and then only as a flex or maybe as an emergency buy pickup.
Well, it's about time, isn't it? With the two Ohio teams, actually, it's a significant division game.
Yeah.
So I'd still stick with the big three in Cincinnati. You got Burrow, Chase, and Mixon. Tight end Azuma, again, for whatever reason, didn't show up last week, so I wouldn't start him if I had him. I would consider, though, starting T. Higgins as a flex because lately he's shown that he's back as a solid target and especially downfield threat for Joe Burrow.
Bills and Jaguars, everyone on the Bills. I really like the extra targeting of Beasley. So to me, he's at least a wide receiver 2 this week. Gabriel Davis finally getting a shot. Like he's the 4th wide receiver. He's a rookie, but he is definitely worth a flex if needed. If you've got that slot you have to fill because of the buys.
Remember a couple weeks ago when I said the Jaguar players like Trevor Lawrence and James Robinson are now considerations for fantasy owners to start? Well, this isn't the week that I was talking about. So Buffalo's D is great. Lawrence is still inconsistent. He really only had a couple of good games this year, and those were against lesser opponents. Robinson is also coming off a poor performance against Seattle, so I'd stay clear of both of these guys this week.
Texans and Dolphins. Do we even need to mention these two teams? I'll give you 2 words. Davis Mills, end of discussion.
All right, let me jump in here and say, what is it Luis Corso says there on College Game Day? Not so fast, my friend.
Okay.
Miami ran into the Bills buzzsaw last week. I'll give them that. But the Texas defense, however, is not that defense. And Tagovailoa has been putting up some impressive numbers prior to last week. Gesicki and Waddle also have come alive lately. So, again, it's the Texans. I believe Gesicki's going to find the end zone. And I think Waddle gets over 80 yards and a touchdown.
Raiders at Giants. With Waller out, I'd take a flyer on Foster Moreau if you need a tight end. Kenyon Drake, possible if Josh Jacobs can't go. If he can go, then no. Otherwise, Renfrow, Carr, and Ruggs are solid.
Hey, the Giants are back home, but they're on a short week following last night's Monday night game against Kansas City. The Raiders are not coming off a bye. So this game is going to be a challenge for New York. And as always, we say regarding buys, if your starting quarterback has one, Daniel Jones could be a strong consideration as a replacement. Other than him, though, there's really no other Giant player worth considering.
Chargers and Eagles. How on earth did the Eagles score 44 points when Jalen Hurts had barely 100 yards rushing and 100 yards passing? 6 sacks, fumble recovery, defensive TD. So the Eagles' defense is worth slotting, and Hurts can't hurt you too much. Now, Boston Scott had a 2-touchdown day. He's worth a look. Jordan Howard had almost the exact same stats. So you pick them. I mean, they were like 3 yards difference. You pick them, both good for bye week plays, but really not much else.
And I'll say for the Chargers, I'd go with the same couple of starters that I would all year, and that would be Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler. I've been pumping Mike Williams lately, a receiver, but he didn't do anything last game. The one Chargers receiver who seems lately to be stepping up consistently is Keenan Allen, so I'd start him.
Packers and Chiefs. Josiah DeGara.
Nice.
I think I got that right.
That's pretty good.
Josiah
You must have
DeGara.
worked on that a little bit.
Yeah. I'm an announcer. He's the tight end, and you should find this week him with Tanyan on IR. He got hurt pretty bad last week, and Mercedes Lewis really is limited to blocking. He's going to catch a couple of passes, but really he's a blocker. So I'd look at Josiah and Cobb and Winfrey. They should get looks at wideout. Check to see if Deshaun Jackson gets traded to the Packers. We're recording this earlier in the week, so that may happen. There may be some other sort of deal. That was the talk. Just Deshaun Jackson leaving the Rams, maybe go to the Packers. So we'll have to wait and see. A.J. Dillon, also a solid start, at least as an RB2.
Well, I'll just say this. It's hard to believe I'm going to say it, but the weak link on the Chiefs offense now seems to be Mahomes. He doesn't seem to consistently make When's the last easy-looking decision he's made? It's been a while. And for that reason, he's a QB I'd seriously consider not starting. Tyreek Hill, on the other hand, changes the game when he's on the field. Yeah. So I'm definitely starting that guy. He just alters the way defense is set up. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the safeties for the Giants were 18, 20 yards off the ball to start the play, which obviously opened up some running lanes.
Cardinals at Niners, Elijah Mitchell. Elijah Mitchell, 6th-round draft pick, has set the Bay Area on its head. 3 straight 100-yard games. And this despite the higher drafted running back Sermon has done nothing. Deebo Samuel remains solid. His team has ignored the tight end since Kittle went down. But Charlie Woerner might be worth an emergency look. I mean, we're talking 1 week. You get these guys, they'll come up for 1 week, coming off of somebody gets hurt, and, they could happen. So he's worth a look if you really need someone at tight end during a bye week.
Well, to flip over to the Cardinals, I think that's the worst I've seen Kyler Murray play as a pro, probably in his life. And he was just missing throws all over the field. I look for him to bounce back. The Niners defense is suspect. Saw Fields, who's another athletic quarterback, just go up and down the field against him. The other guy who I think is going to bounce back is A.J. Green. I'm guarantee you he did not like the way that game ended for him and the Cardinals, who at that time were undefeated. So I think he'll have a strong game. Christian Kirk will come back. Ertz is now a legitimate red zone threat for them. And Rondale Moore, who really didn't do a whole lot last game, I think he'll add some punch as well.
Sunday night game, we got the Titans at Rams. Now, this would have been a great game. That's why it's a Sunday night game. NFL was looking, this is going to be one of those premier games of the week. So that was with Derrick Henry, but it's not anymore because Derrick Henry is not there. Rams should roll. However, here's the big question mark. If Adrian Peterson is on the game time roster, I'd take a chance at flex. He hasn't played. He's one of those guys that does stay in shape. He's got that in his mentality. So he should be a strong waiver wire pickup this week. I've seen it quite a bit. He's already been picked up, but he's still an option, but he's also a question mark, a big question mark. Don't discount Brown or Tannehill. And if Peterson is not there, then I'd try McNichols as Henry's backup.
Here's what I see. Henry is out. So the running game, play action should suffer a little bit as well with the Titans. But for the Rams, Von Miller is in. So what are the Titans going to do in pass protection, having to deal with both Aaron Donald and Von Miller? Without Derrick Henry, this could be a beatdown for the Titans, as you mentioned, sort of alluded to, at least in the beginning. The Rams passing game is going to be accounted for by Tennessee, which is going to help open the running lanes for Dale Henderson. And I look for Higbee to be the recipient of some play action bootleg passes and Kupp and company to make some down the field plays.
There's a question I'm going to ask you. I know you were never traded in midseason, but when a guy goes to a new team, such as in the case of Von Miller, he's got a new playbook to learn. Do you slot him in right away? I mean, or is it really kind of depend on the player?
What defense can he not line up in on the edge and rush the passer? I don't care what you're playing. Dumb it down if you have to. The guy is amazing. And so that's what I mean. Like, line him up and you go. Aaron Donald's on the other side or even inside of him. You can't chip on both of them.
Yeah.
So I just think what a great pickup late season. No one heard about that coming. We're
No.
all waiting for what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson. Where's he going? Well, he went nowhere, and Von Miller could be the missing link to what the Rams have needed to make this playoff push.
And there you have it. Kramer and Brill, Fantasy Football Podcast, now video cast as well. You can hear the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, Odyssey, wherever you get your shows. And now you can also see the video cast on my YouTube channel by going to the Bob Brill YouTube channel or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. You don't even have to leave the homepage. It's all right there for you. That's the easiest way. For my friend and colleague Eric Kramer, I'm Bob Brill, and we'll see you next time. And we are out.